Welcome back to the deep dive, where we unpack the biggest shifts shaping life sciences today. I'm Anna.
And I'm Eric. Today we're tackling a topic that's transforming how companies in our industry think about responsibility, transparency, and long term strategy. The ESG movement in life sciences. Sustainability meets compliance.
For years, the focus in life sciences has been on innovation, developing the next therapy, the next device, the next breakthrough. But increasingly, the conversation has expanded beyond the lab and the factory floor. Stakeholders are asking a bigger question: can we innovate responsibly?
That's where ESG, environmental, social, and governance, comes in. These three pillars are redefining how pharmaceutical, biotech, and medtech companies are measured, not just by their products, but by how they operate and the impact they have on people and the planet.
Exactly. And this isn't a soft optional trend anymore. It's a hard business requirement. According to Deloitte, over 90% of S&P 500 companies now publish ESG reports, and in life sciences specifically, more than 70% of executives say ESG performance directly influences their organization's reputation and investor confidence. That's a big shift from even 5 years ago.
The pressure is coming from all directions: investors, regulators, healthcare providers, and patients. Investors want to know that the companies they back are resilient to environmental risk and ethical scrutiny. Regulators are starting to demand formal ESG disclosures. And patients, especially younger generations, are choosing brands and therapies that align with their values.
Let's start with the environmental side, because that's where we're seeing the most measurable impact. Pharmaceutical and medical device manufacturing is energy intensive and generates significant waste. According to a study published in the Journal of Cleaner Production, the global pharmaceutical sector emits 55% more greenhouse gases per dollar of revenue than the automotive industry. That's staggering.
It really is. And that's why the biggest players, Pfizer, Roche, AstraZeneca, and Johnson & Johnson, have all announced net zero or carbon negative commitments by 2030 or 2040. They're investing in renewable energy for manufacturing plants, reducing water usage, and rethinking packaging materials.
Some are even using continuous bioprocessing to cut energy consumption and waste. By keeping production running in smaller, more efficient cycles, companies can reduce both carbon emissions and raw material waste.
And it's not just the big companies. Emerging biotechs are starting to bake sustainability into their operations from day one, selecting suppliers based on environmental credentials, using cloud-based systems to reduce paper waste, even designing lab spaces that minimize energy use.
Then you have the S, the social component. This covers how a company impacts people, employees, patients, and communities. In life sciences, that means everything from equitable access to medicines to fair labor practices in the supply chain to diversity in clinical trials.
That last point, diversity in clinical trials, has been one of the biggest areas of focus. The FDA's 2024 guidance on diversity action plans now requires sponsors to proactively outline how they'll ensure adequate representation across gender, race, and ethnicity in their studies. That's a major regulatory step toward accountability.
And it's more than a checkbox. Diverse data leads to better science. If a therapy is only tested on one demographic, it can lead to gaps in safety and efficacy data for others. By embedding diversity into research design, companies are improving both ethics and outcomes, a clear example of ESG meeting compliance.
It's also about equity and access. The World Health Organization estimates that nearly 2 billion people worldwide lack access to essential medicines. Some life science companies are tackling this by introducing tiered pricing models, expanding local manufacturing in low and middle income countries, or forming public-private partnerships to make critical treatments more affordable.
Then there's workforce equity. ESG has pushed organizations to confront longstanding gaps in representation, especially at the leadership level. We've seen companies like Amgen and Novartis publish annual diversity and inclusion metrics right alongside financials. That level of transparency would have been unheard of a decade ago.
Right. And that leads perfectly into the G, governance. Governance is the backbone of ESG. It's what ensures these commitments are credible, measurable, and aligned with compliance. Strong governance frameworks mean ethical oversight, anti-corruption measures, data privacy controls, and transparent reporting structures.
And governance now extends into digital ethics too. With the rise of AI and machine learning in R&D, companies are being asked, how do you validate your algorithms? How do you prevent bias in patient data? Who's accountable when AI influences a clinical decision? That's governance in 2025, and it's only going to get more complex.
The life sciences industry is also unique because its governance doesn't exist in isolation. Every decision has regulatory implications. Whether it's FDA inspections, EMA submissions, or global quality system requirements, governance and compliance are intertwined. A weak ESG framework can easily spill into regulatory risk.
Exactly. For instance, the EU Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or CSRD, now requires detailed ESG disclosures from large companies operating in Europe. Those reports must meet strict audit standards, much like financial statements. The new Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, CSDDD, goes even further, holding companies accountable for environmental and human rights impacts across their supply chains.
That means a US-based biotech that sources materials from a European supplier now has to track and report on those suppliers' labor and sustainability practices. ESG has officially gone global and interconnected.
It's forcing companies to build end to end visibility into their supply chains, not just for efficiency, but for compliance. We've seen manufacturers adopt blockchain based tracking and advanced analytics to ensure transparency in sourcing and production. It's not science fiction anymore, it's the new compliance infrastructure.
And we're seeing the same momentum in the US. The SEC's proposed climate disclosure rules would require public companies to report greenhouse gas emissions and climate-related financial risks. If those rules are finalized, ESG data will become a mandatory part of SEC filings, just like annual financials.
All of this points to a fundamental shift. ESG is no longer a marketing initiative. It's an operational and regulatory reality that touches every part of a life science organization. R&D, manufacturing, supply chain, HR, and governance.
It's a redefinition of what compliance means. 10 years ago, compliance was about safety and quality. Now it's about sustainability, equity, and ethical accountability too.
And that's why this conversation is so critical. ESG isn't replacing compliance, it's expanding it. The companies that recognize that early will be the ones who thrive in the next era of life sciences.
When we talk about ESG in practice, it's no longer about lofty goals or nice-sounding pledges. It's about systems, data, and measurable performance. And in the life sciences industry, that means translating sustainability and ethics into quantifiable compliance metrics.
Let's start with environmental performance because that's where the industry has made the fastest progress. Companies are now mapping their entire scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So that's direct emissions from operations, indirect emissions from purchased energy, and the full upstream and downstream impact across the supply chain.
Scope 3 is the toughest part. It accounts for over 70% of total emissions in most pharma and medtech companies, and it's also the hardest to measure because it involves vendors, distributors, and even how products are used and disposed of by hospitals.
Exactly. Some organizations are tackling that by requiring suppliers to submit sustainability scorecards or carbon disclosures as part of their qualification process. For instance, GSK and Sanofi now assess suppliers not only on cost and quality, but also on environmental performance. It's no longer optional, like if you can't prove your ESG credentials, you might lose the contract.
And it's not just about emissions. We're also seeing new benchmarks for water stewardship and waste reduction. Pharmaceutical production uses a tremendous amount of water for cleaning, cooling, and formulation. Companies like Novartis have pledged to become water neutral by 2030, while others are developing closed-loop systems that recycle and reuse processed water.
Waste management is another big one. The industry generates massive volumes of packaging and single use plastics, particularly from single use bioreactor systems. The innovation now is in biodegradable or recyclable alternatives and in rethinking how those materials can be safely reprocessed without compromising sterility or quality.
Then there's the S, the social component, which often overlaps with compliance in ways that aren't immediately obvious. For example, the push for supply chain transparency now extends to labor and human rights protections. The EU's new due diligence rules require companies to ensure that no forced or child labor exists anywhere in their supply chain, even at the subcontractor level.
And that's a huge change because historically, compliance audits in life sciences focused on product quality, things like GMP and ISO standards. Now, auditors are also looking at how workers are treated, what the environmental impact of operations is, and how communities are affected. That's a major shift in what compliance actually means.
Exactly. And let's not forget clinical trials. Social sustainability isn't just about who's in your workforce, it's about who benefits from your research. Companies are under growing pressure to make trials more inclusive, accessible, and transparent.
We've seen major sponsors partner with community clinics, expand trial sites to underserved regions, and use decentralized technologies like remote monitoring and e consent to include participants who might not otherwise have access. That's ESG in action, improving both ethics and science at the same time.
And these changes are starting to influence investor behavior too. ESG metrics are now part of many environmental, social, and governance indices used by institutional investors. If a company ranks poorly on sustainability or ethics, it could face reduced access to capital.
That's right. Investment funds that focus on sustainable portfolios now manage over $30 trillion globally, and life sciences companies are a big part of that ecosystem. The expectation is if you want long term investor confidence, you have to show ESG maturity, not just financial performance.
What's interesting is how data and digital tools are driving that shift. ESG reporting used to be manual and inconsistent. Now we're seeing AI-driven analytics platforms that automatically track emissions, energy use, and supplier compliance in real time.
Yes, and many companies are integrating ESG data directly into their quality management systems, QMS, and enterprise resource planning, ERP software. So instead of ESG being a separate reporting process, it becomes part of how the business operates daily.
That integration is key. When sustainability becomes part of the operational workflow, the same way kappa management or deviation tracking is, it's no longer seen as an add-on. It's just how good companies operate.
And this integration has a regulatory benefit too. When auditors, whether from the FDA, EMA, or ISO bodies, see that environmental and social risks are managed with the same rigor as quality risks, it builds confidence, it shows maturity and readiness.
Absolutely. Another interesting trend is the rise of ESG-linked financing, where loans or credit lines are tied to sustainability performance. So if a company meets its emission reduction or diversity targets, it gets better lending terms. That kind of financial incentive aligns perfectly with long-term compliance culture.
And this is where ESG meets risk management. Companies that are proactive about sustainability tend to have fewer disruptions, fewer recalls, fewer supply shortages, fewer reputational crises. So, in many ways, ESG is becoming a new form of preventive compliance.
It's also reshaping partnerships. We've seen large pharma firms collaborate with suppliers, CROs, and logistics partners to share sustainability data. The goal isn't just to check boxes, it's to drive collective progress across the ecosystem.
That collaboration is critical, especially when you consider that no single organization can meet ESG targets in isolation. The emissions, the waste, the ethical practices, they're all distributed across networks. A strong ESG strategy recognizes that interdependence.
So whether it's reducing Scope 3 emissions, increasing trial diversity, or embedding data ethics into AI tools, ESG is becoming the connective tissue between innovation and accountability. It's where compliance meets culture.
And it's redefining what success looks like. In the next segment, we'll look at how companies are quantifying ESG, turning these commitments into measurable outcomes that regulators, investors, and the public can actually trust.
If there's one thing every life science organization is realizing, it's that ESG can't just be something you talk about. It has to be something you can measure. Regulators, investors, and the public are all asking for proof. And that's where the conversation shifts from goals to data.
For a long time, ESG reports were narrative driven, nice stories about sustainability initiatives or community programs, but that era is over. Today, companies are expected to provide quantitative evidence that backs up their commitments.
Exactly. And that's why we're seeing such rapid adoption of standardized reporting frameworks. The Global Reporting Initiative, GRI, and the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, SASB, were among the first to set global benchmarks. Now, the International Sustainability Standards Board, ISSB, is pushing to harmonize those metrics globally. And that's going to be huge for life sciences, which already operate across borders.
And the expectation is only increasing. In the EU, ESG disclosures are becoming as structured as financial audits. You need to provide data on carbon intensity, energy usage, gender representation, pay equity, ethical sourcing, and board diversity. And those figures are being externally verified.
In the US, companies are preparing for similar standards under the SEC's pending climate disclosure rule. Even though it's framed around climate risk, the ripple effect will be broad. Because once a company starts collecting and publishing ESG data, it sets a precedent for transparency.
And what's interesting is how this data overlaps with regulatory compliance. For instance, a pharmaceutical manufacturer that tracks water use efficiency to meet ESG goals is also generating evidence for environmental compliance audits. A biotech that publishes diversity metrics is supporting its clinical trial inclusion commitments. ESG metrics are feeding directly into FDA, EPA, and EMA frameworks.
Exactly. And we're starting to see companies integrate ESG into quality management systems so that environmental and social KPIs are tracked alongside CAPAs, deviations, or supplier performance metrics. That's what maturity looks like, treating sustainability and ethics as operational data, not marketing data.
Let's break that down. There are really three kinds of ESG data life science companies are working to quantify.
First is environmental performance, emissions, energy, waste, and water. This one's highly technical. You're talking about calculating greenhouse gas intensity per kilogram of product, mapping emissions from logistics routes, or assessing solvent recovery rates in manufacturing.
Second, you have social impact data, which can include workforce demographics, training hours, turnover rates, and community impact programs. For global companies, it also means tracking ethical sourcing and fair labor compliance for suppliers.
And third is governance data, which includes everything from board composition to data privacy incidents and audit results. Some companies are even publishing their AI ethics metrics, documenting how algorithms are tested for bias in patient monitoring tools or diagnostic platforms.
Right? And the companies that are really ahead of the curve are connecting those three data sets. When ESG metrics are siloed, they're hard to act on. But when you integrate them, you start to see patterns. How sustainability investments reduce operational costs or how diversity in R&D teams leads to better innovation outcomes.
It's all about correlation and transparency. But transparency comes with a challenge: data credibility. Investors and regulators aren't just taking a company's word for it anymore. They want assurance that the data is accurate, verifiable, and consistent year over year.
Exactly. That's why the concept of ESG assurance has emerged, essentially a sustainability audit. Third party firms now perform ESG data reviews the same way financial auditors verify annual statements. It's all about credibility.
And that's also why digital transformation is such a big part of ESG adoption. Tracking carbon data or labor practices manually just isn't feasible. Companies are investing in automation, IoT sensors, and AI analytics to gather accurate environmental and social metrics at scale.
For example, some biomanufacturing facilities now use smart sensors to monitor real time energy use and emissions, automatically generating data for ESG dashboards. Others are using blockchain to track sourcing, are proving in real time that their raw materials are ethically produced and compliant with environmental standards.
That technology is bridging the gap between intention and accountability. Because at the end of the day, ESG success isn't about who can make the boldest pledge, it's about who can prove progress with reliable evidence.
And it's changing how boards make decisions. ESG dashboards are being reviewed right alongside quarterly financials. Some boards are even tying executive compensation to ESG metrics, linking bonuses to emission reduction or diversity targets. That's a major cultural shift.
It is, and it's also a governance best practice. When accountability is built into leadership incentives, sustainability stops being a side project and becomes a shared priority.
All of this leads to a bigger point. ESG in life sciences isn't a temporary movement. It's a transformation that's reshaping how success is defined, measured, and rewarded.
5 or 10 years ago, a successful life sciences company was one that brought a product to market quickly and profitably. Now it's about bringing that product to market responsibly, with transparency, with minimal environmental footprint, and with equitable access for all patients.
And the companies leading the way aren't necessarily the biggest. They're the ones that are most agile in embedding ESG into their DNA. They're the companies where scientists, compliance officers, and finance teams all understand how sustainability ties into long term resilience.
And that's where the conversation around ESG becomes really powerful. It's not just a compliance checkbox, it's a catalyst for innovation, efficiency, and trust.
When you think about ESG as an engine for innovation rather than just compliance, everything changes. Instead of viewing sustainability as a cost center, forward thinking life science companies are realizing it can actually drive growth, differentiation, and competitive advantage.
Let's start with innovation in manufacturing and operations. The push for greener, more efficient processes has accelerated the adoption of continuous manufacturing and single use bioprocessing systems, technologies that not only reduce waste but also enhance flexibility and scalability. A recent McKinsey analysis found that continuous manufacturing can cut production costs by up to 30% while lowering carbon emissions by nearly half. That's ESG and efficiency working hand in hand.
Exactly. And the same is true for supply chains. The ESG movement has encouraged companies to build smarter, more resilient supply networks. Digital supply chain platforms powered by AI and blockchain allow real time visibility into every link, from raw materials to patient delivery. That visibility doesn't just improve traceability for compliance, it helps prevent counterfeiting, reduce waste, and optimize logistics to lower emissions.
We've even seen companies pilot AI driven carbon modeling, where machine learning predicts the emissions impact of different supply chain routes or packaging materials. That level of predictive insight would have been unthinkable a few years ago.
And that's where you start to see ESG fueling innovation at a deeper level, not just in how companies operate, but in what they develop. For example, we're seeing an increase in sustainable drug formulation and packaging innovations. Companies are using biodegradable excipients, recyclable blister packs, and cold chain alternatives that cut down on refrigerant gases.
Right. And there's an entire wave of medtech startups focused on eco design, developing reusable surgical instruments, recyclable diagnostic cartridges, and energy efficient sterilization systems. ESG isn't just shaping process improvements, it's inspiring entirely new product categories.
Another area where ESG is driving progress is through partnerships and ecosystem collaboration. Pharma and biotech companies are partnering with environmental NGOs, academic institutions, and even competitors to develop shared sustainability frameworks. Take the Sustainable Markets Initiative's Health Systems Task Force. For example, it brings together major life science leaders to coordinate on climate resilience and reduce global healthcare emissions.
That kind of collaboration is essential because ESG challenges are too complex for any single company to solve alone. Whether it's access to healthcare, carbon neutrality, or ethical sourcing, these issues are systemic, and they demand collective solutions.
Exactly. And that collaboration is extending into investment. We're seeing the rise of ESG focused venture funds that specifically target startups working at the intersection of sustainability and health innovation. Investors are backing companies developing green bioprocessing technologies, digital health tools that reduce resource use, and circular economy models for medical devices.
That's a huge evolution in capital allocation. It means that ESG isn't just an expectation from investors, it's also becoming a selection criterion for funding. Startups that can show a sustainability plan alongside their regulatory roadmap are standing out in an increasingly competitive field.
And that's where Emma International's world intersects with ESG. The firms that succeed in life sciences now understand that financial strategy, regulatory compliance, and sustainability performance are inseparable. A company that ignores ESG risks isn't just failing an ethical test, it's creating long term financial and compliance liabilities.
Absolutely. Take environmental risk, for instance. A manufacturer with high emissions or waste output could face increased regulatory scrutiny, higher insurance premiums, and stricter environmental audits. By contrast, a company that proactively reduces its footprint can qualify for tax incentives, improve financing terms, and reputational benefits.
It's the same story with social governance. Companies that prioritize workforce diversity, safe working conditions, and transparent pay structures are seeing higher employee retention and productivity. Those are tangible financial outcomes tied directly to ESG maturity.
And this isn't speculation. The data supports it. According to the Harvard Business Review, companies with strong ESG performance see up to 20% lower capital costs and outperform their peers in long-term total shareholder return.
That's powerful because it reframes ESG not as philanthropy, but as performance. When you view it through that lens, ESG becomes a framework for smarter, more resilient business.
And it's also helping companies future-proof their compliance systems. The FDA, EMA, and WHO have all emphasized environmental stewardship and ethical responsibility as part of their evolving regulatory philosophies. They may not call it ESG, but the principles are the same: sustainability, transparency, and accountability.
That's a good point. Regulatory agencies are beginning to integrate sustainability into the very structure of oversight. The European Medicines Agency, for example, now requires environmental risk assessments for pharmaceuticals, evaluating how APIs affect ecosystems after use. That's environmental governance embedded in regulation.
And we can't overlook digital sustainability either. With so much of R&D and manufacturing data moving to cloud platforms, cybersecurity and responsible AI usage are now part of ESG governance. Data privacy and energy efficient computing are emerging as new compliance metrics.
Exactly. Cloud providers are being evaluated not just for uptime and security, but for their carbon efficiency. Some life science firms are now choosing data partners based on their renewable energy sourcing. It's another example of how deeply ESG is reshaping operations.
So, if we step back, what we're really seeing is a full scale evolution. ESG started as a reporting exercise, but it's now a strategic transformation model. It influences innovation, shapes partnerships, drives investment, and defines resilience.
And for companies that embrace it early, ESG becomes a competitive moat. It's not just about meeting today's regulations, it's about preparing for tomorrow's expectations.
When you look at everything we've talked about today, transparency, accountability, innovation, and collaboration, it becomes clear that ESG isn't just shaping the life sciences industry, it's redefining what leadership means within it.
5 years ago, sustainability reports were viewed as PR tools. Today, they're part of boardroom strategy. ESG isn't a side conversation anymore. It's central to how life sciences organizations earn trust, attract investment, and maintain compliance.
And trust is really the key word here. In an industry built on public confidence, where patients, regulators, and investors all have a stake, ESG is how that trust is measured. Whether it's proving that your supply chain is ethical, that your data practices are secure, or that your environmental footprint is shrinking, every action builds credibility.
Exactly. And what's powerful is how ESG connects every part of the ecosystem, from research and manufacturing to commercialization and patient access. It's a unifying framework that forces everyone to look beyond quarterly goals and think long term. Are we operating responsibly? Are we prepared for future regulation? Are we making healthcare more sustainable for the next generation?
The companies that can answer yes to those questions are the ones that will lead. Because in today's regulatory and financial climate, ESG maturity equals resilience. It's not just about surviving scrutiny, it's about thriving under it.
And here's the part that often gets overlooked: ESG doesn't limit innovation, it strengthens it. By embedding sustainability and ethics into design and decision making, companies uncover efficiencies, new business models, and untapped markets. It's where purpose and profit meet.
That's what makes this such an exciting moment for life sciences. We're moving into a future where the most successful companies won't just have the best science, they'll have the best governance, the cleanest operations, and the deepest sense of responsibility to both people and planet.
So, as we wrap up today's deep dive, remember this: ESG isn't a box to check or a report to file. It's a blueprint for long term excellence, one that ensures innovation doesn't come at the expense of ethics and compliance isn't achieved at the expense of progress.
At Emma International, we help organizations make that alignment real, connecting sustainability goals with regulatory readiness, operational efficiency, and strategic growth. Because when compliance and conscience move in the same direction, that's when true innovation thrives.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Deep Dive. If you'd like to learn more about how Emma International supports ESG integration in regulated industries, visit emmainternational.com. And don't forget to follow The Deep Dive on Spotify and YouTube for more conversations at the intersection of innovation and compliance.
Until next time, stay curious, stay compliant, and stay sustainable.